Hi everyone, it's Ruby G.
And I'm Joff.
Welcome to Truth in Neurons.
They told us this case was simple. 1 man, 1 knife, 4 adults, 3 minutes, case closed. But studying human behaviour under extreme stress, I'm going to say what many are afraid to articulate. The official story does not withstand even basic scrutiny. Not biologically, not behaviourally, not psychologically, and certainly not when we examine what the human body is actually capable of under these conditions. Let's start with the timeline, because everything flows from this. According to the state, a single offender entered a multi-level home in the early hours of the morning and brutally attacked 4 healthy, conscious adults, 2 of whom had defensive wounds, yet somehow completed all 4 homicides in under 3 minutes. That's not a theory, that is the timeline their own narrative demands. And when you understand what the human body does when it's fighting for survival, when you understand physiology of terror and resistance, that timeline begins to fracture under its own weight.
Now look at the injuries. The state's own exhibits show catastrophic trauma. We're talking skull fractures in 2 victims and extensive defensive injuries in others. These are not the wounds of people who never had a chance. These are the wounds of people who fought for their lives. That means noise, struggle, chaos, bodies colliding with walls, furniture overturning. The guttural sounds humans make when they're fighting death itself. The body doesn't go quietly when it's in survival mode. The sympathetic nervous system floods with adrenaline. Victims scream, they thrash, they knock things over. They make noise that carries through walls, through floors, through windows. Yet at a critical window on the CCTV, we hear a dog barking and no screams, no crashing, no thuds, no sounds of a multi-victim fight to the death. Ask yourself, how does a brutal, multi-victim struggle produce silence? Physically, logically, psychologically. The human larynx doesn't simply shut down in terror. In fact, it does the opposite. Screaming is one of our most primitive alarm systems. So how does a house containing 4 people fighting for their lives become acoustically invisible to the outside world? It doesn't, unless the timeline is wrong or the narrative is incomplete.
Now let's talk about force, about what the human body must actually do to inflict this level of damage, to create catastrophic cranial trauma like the skull fractures documented in the state's own exhibits. You need time, leverage, and repeated strikes. The human skull is extraordinarily resilient. It evolved to protect our most vital organ. Breaking it requires sustained, focused violence. You don't inflict that level of damage and also subdue 3 additional adults in a cramped house, all while preventing escape, preventing intervention, and preventing screams from reaching the neighbours. And you do all of that in under 3 minutes, while moving between multiple rooms, while maintaining complete control over 4 separate human beings, each fighting their own desperate battle for survival. That is not single offender behaviour. That is multi-offender speed. That is multi-offender force. That is multi-offender control. Whether people like it or not, the crime scene patterns read like shared labour. This is about the simple mathematics of violence, time, distance, force, and human limitation, which brings us to behaviour. The surviving behaviours, the response behaviours, the scene behaviours. I will not name individuals, but I will say this. The behavioural evidence does not match the emotional and physiological reality of a shock response after discovering a massacre. When the human brain encounters trauma of this magnitude, it reacts in predictable ways. We see dissociation, we see physical collapse, we see vocal patterns that don't match voluntary control. We see trembling, hyperventilation, sometimes vomiting. The body betrays the mind's attempt at composure. And the body cam footage raises legitimate questions about movement, presence, weapon location, and response protocols. These are not conspiracy theories. These are observable discrepancies between what we know about trauma response and what we're seeing documented in official evidence.
Yet instead of addressing these questions, the institution did something else. They told the public to stop asking questions. They attacked critics instead of answering contradictions. They acted offended instead of transparent. That is a behaviour not of a system seeking truth, but of a system protecting a narrative. And when institutions become defensive rather than explanatory, when they prioritise narrative control over evidence transparency, they reveal something about their own relationship to truth. They reveal that they fear examination more than they value resolution. And then without a trial, without full transparency, and with massive evidentiary gaps still unanswered, officials publicly declare closure, as if declaring the story finished makes it true, as if the public, the families, and the professional community are supposed to nod along and pretend the math adds up. But closure is not a declaration. Closure is what happens when evidence, timeline, and human behaviour align so completely that no reasonable person can doubt what occurred. That is not what we have here.
What we have is a story that asks us to believe the human body can do things it cannot do, that asks us to believe noise doesn't travel, that asks us to believe trauma responses look nothing like trauma responses, that asks us to suspend not just disbelief, but basic biological reality. The wounds don't match the clock. The silence doesn't match the violence. The scene doesn't match the story. And the psychology doesn't match reality. So no, the lone wolf 3-minute silent massacre narrative is not enough. Not psychologically, not behaviourally, not ethically, not when we understand what the human body actually does under extreme stress. And if a system would rather protect its story than pursue the truth, then the system has become the barrier to truth. This is a psychology of institutional failure, the moment when preserving credibility becomes more important than establishing accuracy, when the fear of being wrong eclipses the duty to be right.
That's all for today's episode of Truth and Neurons. If you found this analysis helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on the ethics of media commentary in high-profile cases. Until next time, keep thinking critically and questioning everything. Cheers, bye!